With inflation rates under control and interest rates likely to fall later this year, today we answer the question, is it still worth it to buy a house in 2024? Or maybe more helpful, what are the pros and cons of buying a house this year? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ben Robitaille, and today we're talking about whether or not it's worth it to buy a house in 2024. I'm gonna add a bonus tip if you're thinking about buying a house this year at the end of the video. And if you're like, I've gotta watch the whole video to get to this tip, I've put chapters down below so you can skip right ahead to it if you want. If not, buckle up because here we go. Now, just so everything is above board, it is important to know that I am a realtor and I'm coming at it with that lens. My livelihood depends on me helping people buying and selling homes. But I am going to do my gosh darn best to keep this as unbiased and realistic as possible for the general consumer out there who's thinking about buying a home this year. So pro number one for buying a home comes with a bit of an asterisk. If you can buy a home, you should. And the reason I say that is because it is so gosh darn hard to buy a home. I spoke with a mortgage broker the other day, and interestingly enough, to buy a $650,000 house, which is, I would say, below average in many markets across the country, you have to have a household income of about $170,000 with zero debt. That's just not the case for many Canadians, and it makes buying a home really hard, full stop, no questions, ifs or ands about it. And not to compound the bad news, but I think it's going to get a lot harder before it ever gets any easier. We've got a housing crisis in Canada, and it isn't because of interest rates or anything like that. It simply comes down to supply and demand. There's an interesting article that came out last year from the Fraser Institute that talks about the number of new houses being built in correlation to the growing population of Canada, and how the gap between new houses and new people has never been wider. So between 1972 and 2022, on average, there were 1.9 people for every new unit built. But as we got closer to 2022, that number's gotten higher and higher and higher. We actually peaked in 2022 with about 4.7 new people for every unit built. So without getting up on some kind of political pedestal, it's really up to policymakers to figure out a way to get more houses built, because I know we have to increase the population to keep our economy going. And if you've gotten this far in the video and you're like, Ben, I would really love to buy a house, but I really don't know if I can, then book a call with me. I've got a link in my bio. Book a discovery call and we can figure out exactly where you're at and how to get to where you want to be. Because having a plan is way better than just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. Now, con number one. This may seem like an obvious one, but I was even surprised as an experienced realtor when my wife and I bought our first house a couple years ago. Home maintenance is expensive and time consuming. So maybe you're better off just to rent, and then you don't have to deal with any of that home maintenance stuff that comes up. That falls on the landlord most of the time. But shortly after moving, we had to buy a snowblower, a lawnmower, changing furnace filters, and I mean, relatively small expenses, sure, in the grand scheme of things, but then the time associated with having to do all those things. Now, I've got it down to a science. I've got a calendar set up where I've got everything from smoke detector batteries to lawn care in the calendar, so I know what I have to do when I have to do it and how long it's going to take me. But it still takes time, still requires funds. You need money to do it beyond just your mortgage payment. And then you get the unexpected expenses that you have to take care of as the homeowner. For example, my wife and I went on a honeymoon almost a year ago today. And when we came back, our sewer was backed up. We came into an inch of water on our main floor and we had to deal with it in the moment, have a plumber come in, fix everything. Thought we were gonna have to replace the sewer line. Thank goodness we didn't, but that's all expenses that you need to have in the back of your mind to at least be emotionally ready for, and it doesn't hurt having money set aside just in case these things do come up. It's something we certainly never expected, but have to deal with nonetheless. Yeah, it was a crappy situation. Pro number two, have you seen rent prices lately? Because, gosh, they are high. Now, I don't want to come on here and be one of those realtors who's like, why rent when you could buy? Because buying is hard and saving for a down payment takes a lot of work, and not everybody can do it when they're living paycheck to paycheck because inflation is crazy and price of in most markets, Gone are the days where rent was significantly lower than buying a house. And usually renting was a stepping stone where you could put money aside every month beyond the essentials to save for a down payment or whatever other investments you wanted to make. So once you find a way to get in, real estate is actually a fairly stable investment. I mean, it's an investment like any other investment. There is risk, sure. But if we look historically throughout the years, real estate in Canada has always trended upwards, and with what we're projecting for new builds versus new people, it's going to keep going up. So if you can get in, suddenly you're investing $2,500, $3,500 a month into an asset versus throwing $2,500, $3,500, maybe more away into somebody else's pocket. So long story short, if you can invest what was once a rent payment into your own portfolio, it just makes a lot more sense. Con number 2, you are priced out of the market you want to be in. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That sucks and it's hard, and it shouldn't be this hard, but it is. And I think if this is your case, the issue isn't really should you or shouldn't you buy a home. It becomes, what are your priorities? Are you looking on your own? Are you looking with a partner? Do you have kids? Are you planning on having kids? Do you have pets? Do you want pets? Is the job you currently have a non-negotiable? Are you willing to look for a new job? It's possible that the answer to these questions might put you in a market where home ownership isn't an option. And if it's not a priority, that's totally okay. And I think we've got to be, especially as realtors, be okay with not everybody wants or needs to buy a home. Sometimes leasing or renting is okay and it works for people. That's great. I support you. But my wife and I did something similar a few years ago. We were living just outside of Toronto. We were contemplating where we wanted to be, what we wanted to do, and a resounding priority for both of us was home ownership and being closer to family, and that just wasn't aligned with where we were. That being said, we did want kids and a dog. We now have, well, one and one on the way. We have the dog, the kids on the way. And luckily we were able to find a location where my wife could get a job, I could transfer my business, and buying a reasonably sized home was an option for us. And just because it worked for us doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for you, but it's something to consider. And this conversation doesn't happen in a day. This conversation happens over months of thinking about it, reevaluating, and really at the end of the day, doing what's best for you. And maybe that's not buying a home, and that's okay. Now, my bonus tip, if you're thinking about buying a house in 2024, maybe the dream house is 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2-car garage, a little bit of property. Great. If that's the first house you can buy and you can afford it, all the power to you, but for a lot of people, not realistic. So I like to introduce this concept I call the real estate ladder. First, you buy what you can afford. So maybe that's a 1-bedroom apartment, maybe that's a 2-bedroom condo, 3-bedroom townhouse, maybe a small detached, whatever your budget will allow for. You move in, you live there for a couple of years, you save up for the next house. In a couple of years' time, hopefully you've done some improvements to the unit, you sell, you move into the bigger house. Now, maybe it's still not that big 5-bed, 3-bath, 2-car garage, lots of property, but it's a house that's maybe a little bit step closer, maybe a mid-range in a neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, sizable yard. You live in that home for a couple of years. The value increases. You put some money into the house, improve it. Take that profit, apply towards the next house, and slowly start climbing that ladder so that in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, you are in that home that you saw yourself being in. I know it's long and drawn out and takes a lot of work, but that's just the market we're in. Fortunately for our parents and our grandparents, they were able to buy those houses a little bit quicker for a lot less. This situation that our generation is in is just, it's not realistic to go buy those big houses, again, unless there's that small percentage of you with no debt, great jobs. So it's important to keep these things in mind when we're trying to get into the market. An extra thing you can do when climbing the real estate ladder as well is if the first unit you buy will allow for it, you can always rent that unit out. And if it is cash flow positive, you've started yourself a nice little real estate portfolio. So all of a sudden you've got money coming in from the first house, you're still working your job, and now you've bought a second house, and you can keep working your way up that way, and all of a sudden you're in the dream house with an investment portfolio. Good for you. Doing pretty great in 15 years. Well, that's all I have for you this week. If you like this video, make sure you hit the thumbs up so we get this video out to as many great people like you as possible. And if you want to stay up to date on the real estate world in Canada, make sure you hit subscribe. We'd love to have you around on the channel. If you have questions about real estate or would like to connect, I do have a link in the description of this video. You can book a call with me. There's no obligation to anything. We don't charge. Well, I just like talking about real estate. So if you want to talk about it, find out what your situation is and what works for you, please don't hesitate. Book a call with me. happy to chat. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.